This is Python's Paradise. This is your host, Greg Gilbert, aka the Python Hyena, straight out of Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. And folks, here we are, September the 25th, 2022. And you can see all the stuff behind me because I'm getting ready for conventions in October, and one of them is going to be Frightmare in the Falls, which I got. Of course, any of you just listening to this audio, well, you won't be able to see my shirt, but I do have a Frightmare in the Falls shirt here, and my guest today is going to be there, of course, fangs and all, because we are celebrating the 35th anniversary of Monster Squad. And I have the awesome Dracula himself. I have the awesome the Dracula himself, Mr. Regehr. How do you do? How do you do?
Hi, Greg. How's it going?
Mr. Duncan Regehr. Wow. This is awesome, and I gotta say you were a fantastic Dracula, and I've had Bela Lugosi Jr. on here in tribute to Bela Lugosi, of course, who was the original Dracula. So
Amazing.
yeah, absolutely. But before we get to Monster Squad, we were talking beforehand, and I'm like, I had to get this as part of the interview because it's so rare when I hear of somebody that's actually knows New Brunswick, Canada, and Fredericton here in particular. Tell me about that 1977, you say?
Yeah, I think it was 1977. We were doing a production of Equus. I don't know if you're familiar with the play by Peter Shaffer.
Okay, I know that name.
We started in Fredericton, New Brunswick, in the theater company at the time, and it was run by a guy named Walter Learning. And we actually toured all over New Brunswick with this play. And at the time, that play was highly controversial because there was nudity on stage and horses, which were, mocked up horses, which were terribly effective. They were made out of acrylic plastic and what have you. And I played one of them, in fact, for one of the roles that I played in it. But we toured all over Fredericton during the fall months. And it was an exciting experience, and as I say, very controversial. We were, had picketed, people picketing the theaters outside because of the nudity and, some of the stronger language because it was unusual for the time, and but it was great publicity as well. And
that you get the jump on the Monty Python folks from Life of Brian because they would get picketed 2 years later.
yeah, sure, it was going on. It was a lot of fun. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. No, sometimes I just think people should just, don't go to the play if you're offended
Well, no,
by it.
and I remember being on stage, with these crowds. They were huge crowds
Mm-hmm.
for such a small province. It's it's not a lot of people then there back in 1979, but we were packed every night. And I always remember one guy was so offended that he actually stood up in the audience and started screaming, "Why don't you just screw the horse?" And I thought, well, there's irony for you. He's offended. He's telling us to screw the horse. So, yeah.
Well, if he's offended, why did he pay to be there?
I don't know. It was pretty funny at the time. I mean, we were kind of cracking up on stage, with this guy who's pretty excited.
Like, seriously, it's like, well, I'm so angry, I'm gonna pay to be angry some more.
Well, people do that a lot. Yeah.
That was pre-Twitter, and
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure.
I think people now, I think, just get off on being angry, and I try to stay out of it as best I can.
It's better for your health.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But nonetheless, I was reading up on your background, and one thing that caught my attention was that you were a figure skater.
Oh, many eons ago.
Wow.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Did that play into anything? Because I know Dracula moves in a certain way, you
Oh, I
know?
think all of that early training as a figure skater definitely helped for the movements, particularly these sort of classical type characters
Yeah.
required some exaggerated way of, certainly in Dracula's case, sort of wafting through a scene almost as though he were a phantom. And likewise with Zorro, which I played for,
Yeah.
some 100 episodes or whatever it was. And, I the movements that are required for figure skating certainly transfer to fencing quite well. And, also the general idea behind the movement of the character. I based mostly movement for Zorro on a panther, a cat, more like a cat, even though
Oh, wow.
El Zorro means the fox, but, I moved more like a cat. Was sort of the image that I had for myself in that. And likewise for Dracula, those sort of almost ghostly movements, very swift, very sure, very fast.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, what made you stop figure skating? Just lose interest, or?
I don't think I was ever interested from the beginning. It was
I
just
found
something.
it fascinating that,
Yeah.
like, I can't skate to save my life, but
No, it was just something that I guess, I was naturally good at for some reason. I don't know why, but, and maybe that's the reason why it didn't interest me a lot, was because it was enjoyable to a degree. And
mhm,
then, once you get into competitions and things like that, it became less interesting. You know,
absolutely. Yeah, I hear you there.
yeah.
I hear you there. So I know you're heavily, and we're gonna get to Monster Squad in a moment, but I know you love painting and you're an artist. Um, and like I said, I was reading up on you, and your work is displayed in many places. Talk about because I know you started young being an artist.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what was the initiation to you getting into that? Was like when you were young, were you like just into like you do doodling or something, or
Well,
what?
yeah, I always thought I was an artist, from the time
Okay.
I was about 5 or 6. I believed myself to be an artist. My father was a wonderful amateur painter, and, he didn't interfere with anything that I was doing, but he always made sure that I had materials to play with. And, so I got started like that. But I assumed very early on, in a very arrogant way, that I was going to be an artist, and that was it. Um, and I lived most of my early life in the basement of my parents' home. They had my sisters lived upstairs, and they kept the rambunctious kid down, the boy in the basement. But it was kind of a blessing because it gave me an opportunity to really investigate some deeper things with my artwork. And, it just kind of grew from there. It wasn't until I was about 12 that I, sort of wanted to add acting to the equation. And because my mother was very, very interested in literature, and she sort of encouraged that in her children. She taught us we could all read by the time we were 4.
Oh,
But
wow.
yeah, I mean, she just made sure that was in place. And it was one of the most wonderful gifts she ever gave us, was the ability to read. I mean, apart from, keeping us healthy and helping us grow up. Same with my dad. And, yeah, it's just kind of an involvement of the things that became a way of life. And I say this to a lot of people, that they ask you, well, is art sort of a hobby, or is it a pastime? Is it a vocation? Is it a profession? It's all of those things, of course,
Hmm.
but it is a way of life. And, whether it's painting or sculpting, which I also do, or writing, I've written several books. So, or acting or
Hmm.
directing, it's all a way of life. And when you get up in the morning, when I get up in the morning, it's there. All of it is there, and it's all how I express. those are the different mediums that I work through. And you know, if I could sing, and there are a lot of musicals under my belt that attest to the fact that I can't sing worth beans. You know, um, uh, I would do that as well. Or if I could play an instrument well, I would do that as well. But
Do you have a favorite musical?
I'm not fond of musicals, to be actually honest with you.
Okay.
It's not something that I'm attracted to. Um, but yeah, there's plenty of them. I think anything by Stephen Sondheim has been brilliant.
Okay.
Hard to choose there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, it's funny. You mentioned being in the basement and your sister's upstairs. In a way, it kind of reminded me of stories I heard from Belinda Blasky, who was in The Howling. She was in a lot of Joe Dante's films, and she's a painter. And she used to tell me about not sleeping at night, and she'd be underneath the staircase, just painting or drawing or whatnot, and her mom would find her there doing this, of course she started this at an early age, and I always see her work on Facebook. But yeah, when you get I shouldn't use the word isolated, but secluded from people, it works on your imagination, and it really helps you to to cope when you have lots of time to yourself. But here's a question I have, and I was wondering, do you remember? Maybe you might have to pick your brain on this, or maybe you don't know, but do you remember the first thing you ever tried to draw or paint?
I don't remember that. I do remember getting into trouble at school um, because they wanted it. There was a pretty girl in my classroom that we all had to paint, you know, as a sort of life drawing thing that the teacher set up. I think I was in grade 2. And my father had been painting nudes at home, right? So I thought, well, this is a good idea. I'll just paint this girl in the nude. And I got into a lot of trouble, a lot of trouble for it. That was back in the days when they still had corporal punishment in school. So I got the strap for
Oh,
painting this girl in the nude. And I also placed her in the bathtub. So I thought that was a nice setting for this particular image that I wanted to go for. But they didn't take it in the same serious way that I did.
what about the girl? How did she take it?
Oh, she was completely humiliated by,
Oh,
I was a pervert, of course.
wow. I never ever got the strap. I think they were just starting to do away with that whenever I got into school,
Well,
but I heard
it was
stories
pretty
about it.
regular, when I was a kid. Yeah, it was, every other week, for something.
So
For
Wolfman got
making it so.
nards, Dracula got the strap.
Oh, sure. And the cane. Absolutely. It was part of the whole deal, but after a while you become, just it's just part of the deal. You get used to it. It's you know, didn't have much effect either, I have to say, for behavior.
No, no, actually, in many ways, I think that just makes you act worse.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I had sisters, right?
Hmm.
So, of course, you get a spanking when you go home too, because your sisters will make sure if they've heard that you had the strap at school, they're going to get home first to tell on you so that you get another one when you go home for getting the first one at school.
Well, here's something that I find funny though. You drew the girl in the nude, but you were kind of in a way you were influenced by your dad doing these.
Well, I thought it was okay. It
Yeah,
was
so I
okay.
mean, didn't your dad feel a little bit responsible?
I guess he didn't really think that way about it at all because he'd say, "Well, you knew you weren't supposed to do that," and I don't know. I didn't. I'm not sure that I did know that I wasn't supposed to do that. It might have been a little bit naughty, but what the heck. But the
Wow.
times were different. I mean, everyone's attitude was different in those years. and we're talking about the 50s now,
Mm-hmm.
the 1950s. And, there's an interesting word that's come out recently, presentism. I don't know if you've heard it before, but it's where many people are doing this today, where they look back in history, um, let's say slavery, and
Mm-hmm.
they say, well, if I was a wealthy person back in the early 1800s, I would have been against slavery. I would not have owned slaves. And that's not true, because everybody owned slaves back then. And it
Oh
has
yeah.
been all through the course of history. You can't take your current self and say that you would have behaved a certain way back in whenever, 1650, you would have had the moral constitution that you have today. It doesn't work like that. If you went back to 1650, you'd be thinking in a very different way. You'd be like everybody else.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I just liken it to my own past, because people look at it and they say, well, oh, you got the strap at school and things like that. That's absolutely horrible. It should have been banned. Those awful people. It was accepted. It was the way it was.
Yep. No, I managed to avoid the strap. That was and I was in the principal's office a lot. Actually, it's funny because where I work, my one of my classmates growing up is actually my boss right now, and I joke with her because she was the only female in class I know that was in the principal's office as much as the boys, and I kind of tease her about that. And but we both were saying that it's amazing how we turned out probably better than the ones that were behaved.
Yeah, it could be. It's all a learning process. And, you know, T.S. Eliot had a phrase that only those who are going too far will know how far one can actually go. So there's that exploration aspect to it all the time. Pushing the envelope, trying things out, questioning things. You know,
Hmm.
and there can be consequences for that. But for the most part, I think it develops you.
Talk about the first time you had a painting get either auctioned or sold or something like that. It must have been a major sense of accomplishment and satisfaction to have somebody like, I want this.
Um, yeah, I mean, we're going back a long time, but I used to sell when I lived in Toronto. I lived in Toronto for 6 years back in the 70s. And I used to sell my work on the street. I'd set up a little place and, just sell sketches and drawings and watercolors and things like that. And it helped to pay the rent because I had no money. So, it really worked well that way. So the very first one, it's hard to remember, but certainly once I started showing and exhibiting in more major galleries and what have you, um, the sale of an artwork is always a nice validation.
Hmm.
Um, but the greatest validation will really come from yourself when you know it's right and when it's good and it's honest and it's out there. That's very strong. And many times it's people I find who have a really strong interest in the work. I welcome because they don't have any money, but they're in love with the work in the sense that it intrigues them, it evokes something in them, they see meaning in it, they connect to it in some way. And that is a very, very important part of at least what my motivation as an artist is, the sharing of that. That's very important to me. Yeah, sure. I make money at it. It's one of it's my vocation. But more importantly, that I connect with people and share something with them. We have a dialogue, even if the work is so ephemeral that it can't be explained,
Okay.
um, because it's a visual expression, right? Paintings are a visual expression. Writing is different. That's it's literature, and you evoke images differently with that. But quite often, people ask me, what does the painting mean? Well, it means whatever you get out of it. And that is beyond anything that inspired me to paint it or influenced me to paint the picture.
Well, that was going into my next question, because I was going to say, what what inspires you, like if you paint something or someone, like why that, you know?
That is such a complex area.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's when you say who inspires you, I think it's the artist that inspires the artist.
Okay.
Why are you drawn to creating a certain subject matter? In my own case, my work evolves. It's If I
Mm-hmm.
start something, it's based on a notion, an inkling
Okay.
that there's something here. How What is this? So I started as an exploration. Every piece of work is an exploration. And it evolves from that. It starts to tell me what it wants to be the more I go along the course of creating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It
Yeah.
does. That was
One thing
that's a
leads
great
to another,
answer
and you think,
too.
okay, there's several eureka moments of that. I get what this is now. I get where I'm going with this. This is what I wanted to say. And it all kind of comes out of the subconscious or whatever. I'm not the sort of painter who goes out and does landscapes, or
Mm-hmm.
unless there's another aspect to making a landscape in some way, not just recording it.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be something more there.
So it's kind of like it's an adventure for you. Like
Every
you're
single
kind
time.
yeah, like you're not just painting something, but it's like as you go along, it's like, let's try something here, or I see
Yes.
something here.
Yeah.
Kind of like writing, as you keep,
Yes.
well,
Automatic
maybe,
writing. Yes. Yes.
yeah,
Similar.
okay. I never heard this before, but that is actually very clever. And it obviously adds a great deal of unpredictability and
Yeah.
obviously adventure to your work. Yeah, that's awesome.
Or it can start out, if I can often go into it with a preconceived idea, which
Hmm.
gets scrapped along the way. It's like, where did that come from? Well, I'm moving on with this because I like where this is going, and I'm following it. And it's just, it's, as I say, a very complicated area to talk about. And it's hard to explain it.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Well, I know that you're going to be at Frightmare in the Falls. This will be my second appearance at this event, and
Okay.
and it's weird because I was listening to something last night as I was at work, and because a lot of times if I'm cleaning,
Hmm.
I'll listen to something, and I'm by myself and accompany me as I work. But it talked about the fact that when Monster Squad came out, it was a box office failure. And they talked about all the reasons why that could have been. And they talked about the marketing being marketed like Ghostbusters, but it wasn't really quite aimed at that same audience, or the way it was advertised or this and that. And it talked about how the film has evolved over the year, and even with Andre Gower even doing his documentary about it, and I was listening to all of this in preparation for this interview, because it's amazing to me how certain movies don't catch on when they first come out, and then they become cult films. Example for one I use. 1998, one of the highest grossing films was Armageddon, a film that I found quite boring, you know. But a film that did, moderately okay that year was The Big Lebowski. But The Big Lebowski now is a major cult film,
Yeah.
and Jeff Bridges is pretty much known for that now, and he's embraced it fully, which is awesome.
Yeah.
It's amazing when these films that didn't catch on whenever they initially come out, now are major cult hits. Monster Squad is one of those films that falls into that. What did you think? Like, I shouldn't say it this way. I should say, when did it occur to you that after its initial disappointment that there was something happening with this movie?
Well, it was a few years later, I think. It kind of resurfaced again, and people were actually interested in it. And I was hearing from fans of the film, and it just became obvious that this was something else. And it's grown, as you say, over the years, the interest in this film. And we all know a lot of, well, not everybody knows the reasons why. How could we? Why it didn't work in the beginning. Certainly a lot of it was the marketing. It was just the wrong marketing and the
Hmm.
timing of it. I think it opened with Lost Boys being in another theater or something. It was that kind of thing where it just kind of it got buried, and it didn't resurface until years later. Um, but I think also one of the things that took it out of the running was that it got bumped into a higher restricted category because of one line, which we refused to take out. Give me the amulet, you bitch. Back
Yeah.
then, that was, it's a very controversial line. Not so much today, it's
Nope.
fine. But back then, it bumped the whole film had to go into a new category. So it eliminated the possibility for younger kids to go to the movie. They had to be accompanied by an adult.
Hmm.
So, it just changed the whole program. If they'd taken that line out, the movie would be less of a movie, but kids would have been able to go on their own. So there was that factor as well.
It's strange too because you got kids running around with assault rifles and stuff like that
Exactly.
in the film, and
I
it's
know.
kind of, yeah,
Yeah,
and
sure.
yeah, I don't the back then maybe not thought of so much. Now that takes a whole different picture,
Yeah, sure.
but but certainly one of these staples of the 80s, and I grew up in the 80s, so I remember it very well. um Much music coming into play, and like um like I just saw X and Pearl this um I saw those this year, and I'm looking forward to the third movie, Maxine, which is going to be set in the 80s, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they portray that, because I remember the 80s. So a lot of these movies are a nice nostalgia trip, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and you don't find movies quite like that anymore. That's kind of got that
Well,
uh yeah.
it's cross generational, right?
Hmm.
It's a family program that the whole family can sit down, and that's why I still go to these conventions because I get to meet the kids that are looking at it today, and they're tiny.
Hmm.
Their grandparents watch this thing, and then so the adults are grandparents and parents, and then you have the kids. So that's hence the growth of the audience base as well. It's just become bigger and bigger and bigger, and yeah, it's wonderful, and I love connecting with them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, you're gonna be at Frightmare in the Falls, and it must be kind of cool to uh, make connects, especially if you're Canadian fans. I gotta say, I love Toronto. I would live there if I could, but I understand it's pretty pricey to do so. But I enjoy going there every year, and Lisa's really schooled me on the subways and streetcars. We don't have those here in Fredericton. We don't
No,
even have escalators anymore.
yeah.
So it's a treat. I'm so looking forward to going there next week, um, and then going to Frightmare in the Falls. That's got a huge roster too. Like, I went to Frightmare last year, but due to the pandemic, not as big a roster. This year's 27, you know? Obviously you're going to be sitting by your fellow Monster Squad protagonists.
Oh, I didn't know anybody else was going to be there, so I
You know what? I gotta look his name up because I got Monster Squad. Oh yeah, Stephen Mack.
oh,
Yeah,
Stephen, yeah, Stephen, great.
yeah, he's gonna be there. Yeah. So yeah, I guess his name was left me, so I'm glad I brought the the page up here.
Yeah.
But anyway, nonetheless, you know, that should be fun. But out of these conventions, and I ask this of all my guests, what's the most unique thing you've ever been asked to asked to sign?
Well, a breast. I've done a breast. Let's see.
You didn't get the strap after, did you?
No. But that's probably the most unique thing I've had to sign. Uh,
Now it's like, gee, I'm glad I can get away with this now.
yeah, yeah. But I've met so many people at these different conventions that have actual tats with, Dracula, my Dracula on their arm or their leg or somewhere, and yeah. So they don't need me to sign it. They've got me already.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
When you played Dracula, um, were you in any way, of course, you're making it your own, but was there any inspiration from Bela Lugosi?
Well, I'd seen all those old
Hmm.
Hammer films with,
Yeah,
Bela Lugosi
Christopher
before the
Lee
Hammer
and
films,
stuff.
and
Yeah.
Christopher Lee, and I worked with Christopher, later on, before I did this Dracula, and I wanted to retain those sort of iconic qualities that were part of Dracula, certainly in dress and the austerity of the man. That sort of thing had to be in the character, but I also
Hmm.
wanted to make him, you know, more human and funny in a camp sort of way. So I
Hmm.
kept insisting on dialogue like that during the course of it, and they humored me by giving me good lines that I felt worked with the nature of the character that I was looking for. But I also wanted a character that was just absolutely malevolent. I mean, and a sociopath that knew exactly what he wanted, as most villains do. There's no question in their mind what they're after. It's the hero who's a little confused most of the time. I played both, so I can tell you the
Hmm.
hero doesn't really have much of an agenda other than to stop the bad guy. The
Hmm.
bad guy wants to rule the world. He knows what his whole goal is, and that's the same with Dracula. There were a lot of challenges, though, working with Fred Decker and trying to convince him that I didn't want the Dracula to be so bestial, because he certainly had that covered with, the creature from the lagoon and the werewolf and etc. Those were monsters, and I
Hmm.
wanted a human aspect to Dracula, sort of a send up thing as well. So more approachable in that respect, and all the more evil for it.
You know what? I'm reminded of when Tom McLaughlin did Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, and that was the one where they brought Jason back from the grave, and they did it through because he loved the old monster movies. So when Jason was brought back, it was due to a lightning striking a rod, and he was brought back Frankenstein style. And that was one of the things he wanted to do. But he also wanted to add a lot of humor to the movie. And he was told, be as funny as you want to, just don't make fun of the character of Jason. And he found a great balance in that because it was actually probably the best of that franchise. Would you say that that was the same kind of balance that you had with playing Dracula, where the humor was definitely there, but it didn't make fun or detract from Dracula being uh, a malicious villain?
Yeah, no, I think that was achieved. It really
Hmm.
was. Yeah, I think I managed to do that.
You did well.
Um, but yes, I took him quite seriously, but Dracula would take himself seriously.
Mhm.
He would never be self-deprecating.
No. So how long did it take you in the makeup chair and get yourself all done up?
Well, it wasn't too bad for me. I mean, it was tough on Tom Noonan because he played Frankie, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of work for him in that, and several of the others had lots of prosthetics and things that had to be added on. But it wasn't too bad for me. And it was makeup artist was Stan Winston, a great Stan Winston,
Yeah, yeah.
and we became great friends through that movie. Um, and I miss him terribly. But he was part of the genius of that movie, really,
Hmm.
with special effects that were, of the time, were really, really very good. They
Yes.
still kind of hold. I mean, it's tough competition today with everything that we can do digitally, uh,
Hmm.
to come up with the stuff he did come up with it, but it was pretty well crafted. I remember having a conversation with him. He was doing he was talking to Rod Steiger, and Steiger wanted I don't know if you remember that actor, um, but Rod wanted a sculpture of himself and asked Stan to do it. And he did a brilliant job on it. And he came to me and he said, well, what I do is just, secondary to what you do because you're the artist and stuff. And I said, absolutely not. And we were standing in his warehouse and I said, I'm looking at a 35-foot, Tyrannosaurus Rex that moves.
Yep.
And back then that was like, now they can do so much digitally, but back then he had to make the actual puppet and
Yep.
in that size, and with a lot of, his helpers all, yeah, I remember walking up to it and looking at the skin of the creature, which was absolutely real. It was wonderful.
Hmm.
But so, I digress about the makeup side of it. He was really very, very, he was a genius.
One of the things I think that really worked here too, and it also worked with the tone of the movie, is that there was no altering really of the visual appeal of the characters. You looked like Dracula, the creature of the Black Lagoon, Wolfman, Mummy, and Frankenstein. They, because when other films come up, they alter their looks or they don't look what you might remember. I like the fact that these monsters were made very much in the same vein as the classic monster movie monsters.
Well, that was the
Hmm.
sort of approach from the very, very beginning to do that. To base it kind of on the old movies in a way, the Bela Lugosi imagery,
Hmm.
with all the paraphernalia that I wore, and likewise for the other creatures in the movie. But my favorite, one of my favorite Draculas was Gary Oldman in Coppola's version of
Yeah.
Dracula, and Nosferatu as
Hmm.
well. Another one that was really very, very good. And Willem Dafoe did a wonderful job on later in later years doing that.
Yeah. No, though he wasn't Dracula, I loved
No, but
Chris Sarandon as in Fright Night. I really liked as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
Had that same kind of charm. Because Dracula really has to have kind of disarming charm to him, and you were able to bring that, um, because he can't put you in that kind of trance. Or no, he could put you in that kind of trance, whereas the others can't quite do that.
that's right. Well, yes, he's an intelligent, super intelligent person, far
Hmm.
more so than you or I, and
Hmm.
he's it's almost a seduction with him in a way,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely, absolutely. So what was your biggest challenge playing Dracula? Is there anything, was there any hurdles in it?
I think just physical. I had to lose a lot of, I was, fairly muscular and built up for the previous role, which was a gladiator. So I was fairly, muscly and what have you for that. And then, just losing an awful lot of weight, which made me really dizzy most of the time. But, otherwise it was pretty good. I think it was a, tough schedule, but interesting.
Now you got the other monsters. Now Tom Noonan, of course, I remember him working with in scenes with Rodney Dangerfield and Easy Money, and and here he's Frankenstein. You know what's interesting about the character of Frankenstein? He's the only one who's really not a monster in the villain sense. There's an innocent to him, and I like how they played with that idea, how the little girl seems to get him, and he's the one you can kind of save, so to speak.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
uh Talk about working with Tom.
Well, one of my favorite scenes was with the Frankenstein character with Tom, and
Mm-hmm.
where they're talking more intimately, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, I liked that scene very much. He didn't have to project, speak a lot in the scene. It was mostly me, but I enjoyed the connection of what was going on in that scene for sure. Yeah. And the rest of it was fun too. I was delivering one-liners like, meeting adjourned and, that sort of thing.
And I gotta say too, Jonathan Grise as the Wolfman. Now he's kind of, now I think of Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite when I see him now. But the Wolfman's another one. He's a vicious character, but when the curse is broken, which means you pretty much gotta hit him with a silver bullet, he's so glad that the curse is being lifted. You get the moment where he says thank you. He can finally be free of this. It's like I always pictured the Wolfman as like a health thing where you have something you can't control, and then suddenly
Yeah.
there's medication that can help you. Of course, in this case, unfortunately, it's a silver bullet. But
So, yeah.
yeah, but I like the humane side of even the vicious monsters in this.
Well, yes, yeah, traditionally vicious monsters, but I mean, even if you look back at the old werewolf movies, it is
Hmm.
still about a man who is taken over by supernatural forces, which are a torture to him, and are his behavior as the werewolf is anathema to what he is as a human being, and so there is a release with death. But all of those characters, in some way, even the mummy,
Hmm.
have a sympathy with the audience in some way, you know, whereas Dracula, it serves as a brilliant contrast and makes Dracula appear even more malicious.
Yeah.
And so it works, that balance works quite well.
Well, even seeing like the creature of the Black Lagoon, horrifying creature, but kind of
Yeah,
reminds me of with if an animal escapes from the zoo. It's not that
yeah,
they want to kill people, it's like, where do we go, where do we go.
sure.
And if they get into a neighborhood, they're very confused, obviously very violent, because it's the only way they can react to it. So yeah, I like how the creatures were drawn out in this movie. I thought it was terrific, and I think the tone and the balance of humor and horror elements really worked well in
Mhm.
this movie. Now, when you guys were on set, did you guys stay away from the kids to make it a little more effective?
We did. Yeah, Yeah, no, specifically there were, um, it worked. I mean, for those kids at that time, this was all real and happening, and it was an exciting adventure for them and what have you. But we kept more mystery with the monsters, if you will, that way, and they were more terrifying to the kids because of it. Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. The little girl's name. Oh, Ashley Banks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I liked her innocence, Um, and I'm not taking away from her talent, but how much of that was her acting and how much of that was her being completely in awe of what she saw you guys as in makeup?
Well, I think at that age, it's probably, I'm guessing, you'd have to ask her this question, but if she even remembers, but um, I would think at that age, those areas blend into each other. It's a
Hmm.
gray area. Is this real or isn't? And you can easily sell them Santa Claus still at that age, or at least they're on the cusp of saying, is that guy really real? Is he really going to come down the chimney? Really?
Dracula
The time
might.
when they absolutely emphatically believe in it, and she may have been somewhere in there with it. And I know she was certainly terrified of Dracula, you know. She
Oh,
terrified
she was
me.
wonderful in it, because
Yeah.
kid actors can be hit or miss,
Yes.
and she definitely hit straight on.
Mhm.
Um, how real was that reaction whenever you called her a bitch?
Yeah, I think that was pretty real. That was the kid could scream. It terrified me. I just, it was.
Your ears rung?
Oh man. Yeah.
What was it like when you first saw her when the movie started to get popularity? What was it like seeing her after that?
Oh, and oh, she's a wonderful woman. I mean, she's has a family, children, and
Mhm.
everything now. But yeah, no, we hit it off right away, and we're
Oh,
good friends today because she's a she's a lovely person and very very intelligent, and yeah, she's a warm, interesting human being.
I haven't had her on here yet. I got to get her on here,
Oh, she's great.
but
She's great. You'll love her. Yeah,
yeah. Oh, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but she was wonderful in that, and of course we can't take away from the other young actors in the film.
Yeah.
Like I said, you mentioned the Lost Boys. Well, these kids kind of took that on too. I love the fact, and I got to admit, I go call ignorance on this because I didn't know about the documentary until I was listening last night. I was doing a cleaning at a UPS last night after work, and I was listening in because I wanted to get a little more of a background on the movie beyond what I initially knew. And I love the fact that Andre Gower went out and he's like, let's make this documentary and celebrate the cult following of Monster Squad. I love the fact it just kind of hit him. It must be a huge thing going to these cons and all this is like this was not the initial reaction, and he does a documentary on it. And I know he
Mhm.
he approached you to be in it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right.
what was that experience like?
Oh, it was great. I mean, my hat goes off to Andre because he really he's a little generator. I mean, he really, believes in this. And I think that this movie, for all of these people who were children in the movie, it was such a defining experience for them in their lives. And they've carried it forward. I mean, what are they in their late 40s now, some of them? Um, but it remains as being a very, very important part of their early development. And so he made this documentary. I'm not sure about his motivations other than to, sort of celebrate the movie.
Hmm.
Um, but there may be some sort of nostalgic aspect there for him as well. But he's a force to be contended with. He's really, into it. He's got a lot of energy. I know he suffered some heart problems a couple of years ago, which he's recovered from fully. And but he's a ball of energy, that guy. He's great.
And I love how the kid characters are painted here. You got him, and you got the standard the nerd character. You got the kid, the overweight kid being bullied.
Mhm.
Who says that line? Wolfman's got nerds, and
Mhm.
I don't know this guy personally, but of course there's this. I think it's a podcaster out there called Wolfman's Got Nerds. Did you hear about him?
No.
There's actually a podcaster called Wolfman's Got Nerds, and it's actually kind of funny, and it's based on this movie.
Mhm.
How ironic! You never know what lines are going to get out there.
No,
That became a big iconic line. Wolfman's Got Nerds.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, another thing that really grabs me with this film is you got the older kid in the black leather jacket who seems to be the cool kid, but he's really an outcast himself. Now, technically, in any other movie, this would be the kid that they'd be fighting against. But it's interesting looking at this guy, and it's like he may have been an outcast himself, and he sees something in these kids, and he wants to be part of the Monster Squad.
Mhm.
And there's something very, very appealing about that element of the film too, and what is brought to the film through that.
Yeah, I suppose you could liken him a little bit to sort of a Fonzie character, um, in a way. He's a little bit like the Fonz.
Not like Squiggy.
Well, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. You had Henry Winkler in Scary Movie as a principal, or not
Yeah.
Scary Movie, and Scream as the principal, and in Scary Movie it was Squiggy as the principal. Talk about a different contrast.
Yeah, good.
I had David L. Lander on here before he passed, and I thought that was a huge funny joke to me that a lot of the younger generation did not grasp that, and I laughed out loud. It's like went from Fozzie to Squiggy. Which school do you want to go to? But nonetheless, when the film initially came out, did you go to the premiere?
Yes, yes, I think I did. Because I did a lot of them back then. Um, yeah, I think we did something at Planet Hollywood, as I recall. Uh, yeah, I think I did.
You still stay in touch with Fred Decker?
I haven't spoken to Fred for a few years, but I have seen him at a number of conventions, and
Mm-hmm.
it's always good to see him. Uh, he's a good guy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, moving on from Monster Squad, you played Pat Garrett as well, of course, of Billy the Kid fame.
Yeah, yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, that came after Monster Squad, I think by about a year or so, 1988.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Gore Vidal's Billy the Kid, who he was also in the film. And Billy the Kid was played by Val Kilmer, and
Mm-hmm.
Rene Aubergenois was in it, playing the drunk, and well, several other people. Wilford Brimley, the late Wilford, was a good pal. Um, but yeah, it was an interesting project to do because um, Gore Vidal's approach to it was to examine the relationship more between um, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid,
Mm-hmm.
in perhaps a more realistic way. We tend to, and this was one of the arguments throughout the whole filming of it. Val was pretty insistent that these guys were almost heroic in a legendary way, particularly Billy, the kid that he was playing. Um, and my approach to it was the opposite, is that they're criminals. Both of them were pretty sociopathic and even psychotic. I mean, they killed a lot of people, both of them,
Mm-hmm.
and were brutal in a way. But, as time goes by, we have this tendency to laud people for any accomplishments that they make. Not that those two made any. I mean, Pat Garrett's accomplishment was what? He killed Billy the Kid in the end. But he was a bad guy too.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, we applaud people like Alexander the Great. Well, Alexander the Great, was a Macedonian who conquered and created an empire, but he killed an awful lot of people to do it. And the same with Napoleon or any of these people. We tend to look at them as, legendary, but not necessarily good guys.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Um,
S-
yeah.
Speaking of good guys on the polar opposite, played Zorro.
Yeah. You're right. Right.
Talk about playing Zorro. I mean, Antonio Banderas, of course, brought even new fans to
Yeah.
Zorro. Wasn't a big fan of the second one, but that first one had a lot of nice humor to it that Antonio Banderas brought. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, um, but talk about your rendition of Zorro.
Well, my rendition of Zorro was much more what the studio wanted.
Hmm.
My initial approach to the Zorro character was, yeah, okay, great. You have the hero side of him, which is the man in black that runs around with a mask and saves people.
Hmm.
And the other character, the other side of his character is this also a false character, the Don Diego character, who is pretending to be, fairly innocuous and not, he's certainly not a hero type.
Hmm.
Uh, and traditionally, that character has been played as a fop. And I, wanted to move away from that and try something else. So I came up with the idea of, well, let's make him more like a Ben Franklin type of character. So he's very nerdy and very, with the pince nez glasses, and he's very bookish. Let's do him as with my hair color, blonde, and
Hmm.
you know, so that because nobody knows what color Zorro's hair is or anything. He has a scarf wrapped around it. They would never know what it was. So I started with it like that, and then, the note kind of came back saying, "If you want to play that character this way, you're not going to be playing it." So
Ah.
yeah, so I never got to do the sort of Don Diego El Zorro character that I wanted to play, but I told the line as what the studio wanted, what the producers wanted, which was to base him somewhat like the Guy Williams character from Disney. Now, I didn't do what Guy Williams did at all, but I had my own approach was to make him again a much more sort of sophisticated, interested in art, interested in chemistry and science and that sort of thing. So I had that, at least got that much of it. But physically, the look between the two of them was not that much different. And it was a big ask of the audience and of which they went along with quite well. But when you think about it, in the Pueblo of Los Angeles, um, you know, the only 6'5" guy in town is Don Diego, and Zorro, of course, is 6'5" as well. And in the Pueblo of Los Angeles, they're surrounded by these very small Californian people. So it's sort of, gee, I wonder who Zorro is. But you take that leap of faith as though people would never know.
Yeah, I kind of look at this way, and I get it. The studio wants something, but I know if I was making a movie and somebody was going out of their way to try to enhance the character, I'd be like, wow, I like this. It's kind of like, when I work at the hospital, like I worked with two fantastic coworkers last night that I'd never worked with before, and sometimes, you work with people that, they're just putting in their time for a paycheck. And then you get people that are like, they're really taking this seriously. And it's like, wow, it's like you appreciate working with them because they're going beyond just being a job, you know. Well, I love the fact that you were taking the initiative to try to do something different with Zorro. So unfortunately, they didn't go with that, but at least you know it wasn't a just a paycheck film, as some actors get labeled as doing films just for a paycheck. You know, it was a little different.
Yeah, yeah, I would say it's a little different approach to it, but I made it my own in
Hmm.
the end, and it was a very interesting project to do, and certainly fulfilling. Shot in Spain, um, just outside of Madrid, and I mean, it was a fabulous time, and I mean, I worked very, very hard playing two different characters. There were all the speeches to learn every day, and sword fights to learn. We did all our own fights and stunts and stuff in those days, and so it was physically demanding, but very fulfilling. And we didn't have the CGI and stuff that we have today. So you look at fight scenes today, and of course, they're absolutely beyond belief. The speed that they can crank it up to, um, in post, and it's we had to do it ourselves. We had the sword fights were what you see.
Talk about training for those. I've seen, for example, um, Conan the Barbarian. I've seen photos and whatnot of the training that Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sandal Bergman and company had to go through to make very convincing swordplay for Conan the Barbarian. Talk about that sort of thing for Zorro.
Well, I had uh, the late Peter Diamond as my fight coordinator, and I'd worked with him before on a thing called The Last Days of Pompeii,
Hmm.
where very different sort of sword fighting and
Yeah.
gladiatorial weapons and what have you
Hmm.
were used, and just different. But when it came to the fencing thing, I'd had quite a bit of experience with fencing through being at Stratford, which I was trained by Patrick Crane in fencing. So I kind of came to it with that in my back pocket. But Peter Diamond was so brilliant. He just took it to another level. I worked with him and I loved it because we together we came up with this way of using foil and mixing it with saber so that you could do all the sort of close up, where you got the blades almost chattering to each other and
Yeah.
flashing in being close up. And then for moving across the pueblo or whatever, across the vast streets and what have you on a long shot, we would go into saber mode and get the big sweeping cuts, and it was great. I loved it. I had great fun with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I haven't seen this film, but I gotta bring it up because I clicked on it. Was it Blood Surf?
Okay.
I love that reaction. Not a good
Yeah.
experience.
Well, blood surf, right.
I'm glad I brought it up. That was a great reaction.
Yeah. Well, what can you say? Uh, it was nice to go to the Philippines and shoot it. Uh, yeah. Anyway.
Good thing this interview is not going to be released publicly before Frightmare in the Falls. I just imagine everybody showing up there with blood surf stuff.
Oh no. Well, well, I'm just saying it's. Yeah. No, I don't think it was one of my better performances. Let's put it that way. I can't speak for the rest of them, but certainly, yeah, interesting choices.
Well, you got to go to the Philippines. Hey,
Yeah, no,
you
yeah.
got something out of it, you know?
Oh, yeah, it was good fun. Yeah.
Yeah. When you do go on film sets, when you got downtime or whatever, or you're in your trailer, do you ever do any painting?
I did for a while. Certainly, later years in doing television series.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I worked on many different paintings and what have you in my trailer,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I mean, it was just something that I could do if I had time.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly never did it during Zorro because I never had any time. I worked in every single scene, so
Mm-hmm.
I never had any downtime. But yeah, sometimes.
Do you have any charities you wish to promote on here that you're passionate about?
Well, I'm working with Victoria Hospice right now on Vancouver Island, just
Mm-hmm.
kind of donating. I just lost a friend this week who was there, and that's really it's a personal donation thing, and I keep most of my charity work private. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't.
Yeah, that could be hard. I lost my dad to ALS back in April, so
Mhm.
yeah, it's hard but losing people close to you, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's it's something that I take very, very personally, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to um, appear as though I'm applauding myself in any way for contributing. That's all.
No, 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 it's great, but you know what? People can hear this and maybe they can make a donation so it helps the cause, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Now we got to plug your web page.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's duncanregehr.com,
Mm-hmm.
or you can do duncanregehrartworks.com, or petleyjonesgallery.com. And I mean, that's a tough one for people to remember, but Petley Jones is, one word, spelt PetleyJones.com. And you can see a lot of my artwork on that as well. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, and a special, of course, shout out to your manager, Chris, who put this together. Very, very polite, you know, and
yeah,
when I reached out through the website, and he was very polite with me, and he told me what dates you were available. Uh, this was the best I could do because I was working at the hospital uh, the other dates, and I was like, well, let's do Sunday, you know. And I was glad he did
yeah.
had threw the weekend in there too, you know. So yeah. But nonetheless, you know, what a pleasure and honor to have you on here today, you
Oh,
know, and you know,
pleasure was mine. It was a nice chatting with you.
and of course, Frightmare in the Falls.
Yeah.
How much are you looking forward to that?
Well, I haven't been to Niagara Falls for many, many years again. I don't think since
Hmm.
1979 or something. So it'll be nice to revisit and look at the falls.
Well, you know what? It was my first time there last year. Like I said, I did Horrorama. This will be my fourth year doing Horrorama, and it was actually the band Blood Opera. I got one of the little things here.
Yes.
They were endorsed by George Romero.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, they get all done up in monster costumes and they sing a lot of movie themed songs.
Right.
And they really turned me on to Frightmare in the Falls, and I did my first one of those last year, and I had such a ball.
No,
So, yeah, and I still got to book my hotel,
you're gonna
you
book it.
know. But
Well, I tried to talk my girlfriend into coming with me, but she's not going to. So her loss. Never mind.
what's wrong with her?
No, she's busy. She's working. She's got to work. So
You could be Dracula, and she could be Elvira.
no, right. Yeah.
Actually, I met. Speaking of which, I never did ask about the Dracula, but the vampire brides and that. That was a creepy element in Monster Squad.
Creepy for who?
There was just something about them wandering slowly.
Yeah.
towards it. There's just something very eerie about that, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the image of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Well, too bad she's not going to come and enjoy this, you know.
never mind.
But you're in great company at this event, you know, and
That's good. Yeah.
yeah. So I look forward to it, and yeah, it's going to be quite the happening. But I thank you so much for
Well,
coming on here today. And I just wanted to ask before I let you go if you'd mind doing a plug for my show.
sure.
Just state your name and that you played Dracula in Monster Squad, and say you're listening to Greg Gilbert on Python's Paradise.
Sure.
Go for it.
So, hi, this is Duncan Regehr, and I played Count Dracula in Monster Squad. And I'm here with Greg Gilbert on his podcast, and we're going to have a little talk. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Duncan, for coming on here. This was such a pleasure and honor. And yeah, well, see you the end of next month, you know.
A real pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely. God bless you, and great work with your art. You know, I'm glad you got a real passion there, and I wish you the best of luck with that. You know,
Thank you.
sounds like something that keeps your sanity.
Yeah. Oh, well, or insanity. You never know. It all works.
It all works. It all works. You take care. You have yourself a wonderful day.
And you too. Thank you.
No
Bye bye.
problem. You take care. Bye bye.